Hi, I'm Stephen Majors with the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine. I'm here today with Faraz Ali, the CEO of Tenaya Therapeutics. Faraz, welcome to ARM Studios.
Thanks for the opportunity.
So yesterday we heard a little bit from former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb, who said that basically investors might flow back into the sector once there's established success against some more prevalent diseases. And I know your company is on the front lines of that. So how do you see things?
Well, let me first just talk a little bit about Tanaya and who Tanaya is, and then I'll come back to that question. So Tanaya is a clinical stage company. We are about 110 people in South San Francisco, kind of unique in three ways. One, we're 100% focused on heart disease. That's all we do, particularly focusing the heart tissue. Two, we do both rare and prevalent forms of heart disease. So we both look at and try to address rare, severe genetic cardiomyopathies, but we also try to go after prevalent forms of heart failure where you might identify a genetic marker, which you can go after. And three, we pursue modality agnostic drug discovery. So I know at this conference, we're all about, and so are we, gene therapy and gene editing and regenerative medicines, and we have those in our earlier portfolio, but we also have small molecules and gene silencing efforts. So we truly follow the science. We try to see what is the disease and the underlying cause of disease, and how do we pick the right tool for the job to address that. So that's Tanaya in a nutshell. It's an exciting time for the field. We have seen ebbs and flows in the capital markets. There was a bit of a boom back in 2021. We all lived through it. Tanaya, in fact, went public back in 2021 as part of that boom. It's been a bit of a tougher period, but I do agree with Scott Gottlieb that when there is data that is clear and definitive and undeniable that you're making an impact on the natural history of the disease, then I think capital formation is possible. People are able to raise money to push those programs forward. The tough part is for the long tail of early companies, including preclinical companies and maybe early clinical companies, where you have not yet hit that just profound proof of concept quite yet. I think that's an area where the markets have been a little bit tougher to get involved at that stage. But I do believe that there's ebbs and flows in the markets. That always happens. But if you look at the long-term potential and trajectory, I'm very confident that the markets will be there to support innovation as they have been, to date. Maybe with the ebb and flow of the markets, it makes sense for companies to be really, really discerning. I think there was a period of time where I have a new technology, I got a platform, I should go public, right, and build out 200 people. I think that shifting is thinking. You've got a platform. Instead of focusing on building out the platform, focus on the first, second, third best use case for your technology and advance a therapeutic that's going to have a meaningful impact on patient lives. And I think investors are now supporting those kind of stories. Get quick to the clinic and get through the clinic and generate that data. And then they will be more inclined to invest in both the programs and the platform. I think that era of just platform building for the sake of platform building and hoping that will be enough to attract investors, I think that era is, at least for now, over.
Got it. Yeah, thank you. And speaking of markets, let's talk about conventional wisdom around gene therapy. What's one thing that you think conventional wisdom is getting wrong right now?
Yeah, I think there's, with any new modality, there are going to be kind of ups and downs, and people are still learning what's possible. And so you've got, I think conventional wisdom for a while was maybe we don't have the safety profile that we want. But then we learned a lot along the way. There were clinical holds. There was a time where all the headlines were about clinical holds, either because of manufacturing or safety. And maybe some people doubted whether these modalities were going to make it, and be relevant in the future. Well, we actually understood. We didn't understand the technology as well as we needed to, and we started learning more once we got into humans. And then we learned how to predict and address and mitigate, monitor and mitigate those safety issues. So I think that perception that things are unsafe, I think, is mostly gone, and now we've had several approved products. I would say there's a perception that maybe this is only going to be for niche markets, right? Only for the really rare, the really orphan, the really severe diseases, because that's the only place where we're going to be able to scale up and have the cost of goods and the safety profile. I think that's a misperception as well. And perhaps one good example of that is, wet AMD. My former company where I was at, Regenx Bio, they have a very advanced stage wet AMD program, and that's a very prevalent indication. right? And that's I think part of what enables that is delivery directly to the organ of interest. Bayer and AskBio, they have a phase 2 program in a prevalent form of heart failure using gene therapy. And, that is, they're doing a direct infusion into the heart. So again, small volume of drug, which means in both of these cases, the delivery allows for more precise delivery of the drug to the target organ, which means better safety profile, less systemic exposure, and importantly, lower cost of goods. So you can have a product that is, I think, commercially viable and at societally responsible responses. We even have a program in our preclinical pipeline that is also a cardiac regeneration program that involves a direct injection to the heart. You snake a catheter up the femoral artery and you do direct injections around the scar of a patient who has had myocardial infarction. Guess what? Myocardial infarction is a pretty prevalent indication. And again, very, very small amount of total drug that needs to be direct injected around the scar in order to regenerate cardiomyocytes. That's another example of a genetic therapy or regenerative medicine intended for a large population that I think, once we work out the kinks in the science, could be a commercially viable product. So I think that perception that this will only be there for niche products, I think that's wrong. And then we have growing evidence of people today, both preclinically and clinically, showing that genetic medicines and cellular therapies are relevant. Parkinson's, that's another great example where some great work being done in the Parkinson's space. So I think that is, we need to dispel that notion that genetic medicines and regenerative medicines are only going to be relevant for very severe, rare, and they'll therefore always be niche and not of interest to either investors or big pharma. Nothing further from the truth.
Yeah, and then some of these challenges we're seeing with some of the early gene therapy rollouts, particularly in some of the rare diseases. Do you see any lessons from those rollouts that apply to more prevalent diseases? I mean, is the commercialization story for prevalent diseases going to be different?
It's an interesting question. Look, we already have the first blockbuster gene therapy product in the form of Zolgensma that was started by a small company called Avexis, bought by Novartis, and now more than 3,700 patients have been dosed in more than 50 countries. That is I think they're making $1.5 billion or so a year now on that market. So it's a blockbuster many times over. That's today. That's already happening. Now, granted, that's still severe. A rare, severe genetic disease. Now, for prevalent indications, what are lessons learned? I think there have been such incredible work in CAR T and oncology and ex vivo cellular, genetically modified cell therapies. And to the extent that the early wave of those have been autologous-based therapies, that's hard, right? It is profound. It's transformative. We often talk at ARM about the great work in beta thalassemia and sickle cell, including my former company, Bluebird Bio, has done some innovative work there. It's incredible and transformative. It works 90+% response rates. But it's hard to see how we're going to scale autologous cell therapy for large indications. It's not impossible, and I know that there are people trying to crack that nut. But that clearly leads to people thinking about allogeneic approaches, right? And so that's an example in the cell therapy space, not stuff that we're doing at Tanaya, but that's an example of that. I think the more on the gene therapy side, look, if you do a direct injection to an organ that might be an inpatient, though some things like wet AMD could be outpatient. So I think we as innovators have to be thinking about that question from the get-go. When we're designing a product profile, that this technology, what are the indications where you can solve a meaningful problem, but also deliver it in a way that can be commercially and societally viable. And so that might lead you to thinking, instead of an ex vivo autologous approach, maybe I need to do a allogeneic approach. You might think of you delivering it in a way that allows you to do it in an outpatient setting that can make it more accessible to people versus only applicable in an inpatient acute care setting. So I think these are not insurmountable things. And these are things that frankly, even traditional medications that are not gene and cell therapies, they have to think about those exact same things when you're talking about doing, direct injection, sub-Q, an infusion, or something else. So I think this space is going to go through the same growth and maturity to start thinking not just about, I got a great platform, but how do you connect that to a patient in need and make it work within the healthcare system, both from a logistics and a cost perspective. So,
well, I think that's a great place to end. Thanks a lot, Faraz, for being on ARM Studios.
Great. Thanks for the opportunity.